The first few minutes of a show are important. I realize that sounds redundant to say because, of fucking course they are. But I promise I'm not just polishing my first place trophy in the who can best point out obvious shit competition. They set the audience's expectation and tone for the series. The immediate imagery presented informs you whether what you're watching is actually appealing. Are the pictures on screen interesting? Can I follow the flow of the actions? Is what's being presented establishing the plot or characters in any way? I know the average viewer isn't asking these questions directly because no one other than hack YouTubers like myself would, but on some level viewers are aware of them. So with that in mind, the editing in Wiz is absolutely atrocious. In the first few seconds of the series, the viewer is bombarded with a string of random imagery with little in the way of context to even explain the most basic of shit. Splicing in shots of a city to the beat of the music with a guy carrying a baby isn't inherently flawed, but ask what this is trying to communicate. What information is gained? The pace of these cuts and the disjointed nature makes it hard to understand how all of this is connected. Basically, this all comes off as random pictures. It took 3 whole viewings for me to understand that this mess was meant to be the main character's backstory, showing that he was either found as a child or the guy carrying him is his biological father, and a rough explanation of the abilities in this series. And then it smashes into an explanation of this whole handshakers thing, since this is a sequel to that series. But it's shoehorned in and a connection isn't even attempted. I can't stress enough how attempting to introduce your character and then jumping into the world building without using that character as a method to do so is poor storytelling. With no through line through the edits, it's hard to tell these things are related in any way. So since the main character isn't present, I don't know who any of the characters are in these scenes, and so far the series hasn't established a plot thread to even follow. So why should I care? But before you can even wrap your head around what you're watching, it then cuts to a 10 years later title and an action scene. At this point, not even 3 minutes into the episode, mind you, the series has just given up on having the audience follow along. Speaking of the action scene, I just have to look at it because it felt off. I mean, for a number of reasons, but there's an underlying issue here. It's animated to look flashy. This is to introduce what the fight scenes in the series will be like. Tracking shots with characters doing crazy acrobatics while swinging absurd weapons. It looks cool, I guess, but having watched this episode so many damn times I could be declared legally insane, I realized what's driving me crazy about it. It's hard to tell how the characters fighting relate to one another spatially or temporally. There's clearly 4 characters fighting, but it's actually 2 one-on-one matches. Did you notice that it's supposed to be 2 distinct matches cut together to look like one? Because that sort of trick only works when it means something. And this particular scene has 0 meaning to the audience because we don't know a goddamn thing about anyone in it at the moment. The color grading and background doesn't even distinguish that these 2 fights aren't one and the same. And the goddamn... Okay, hold up. Listen to this music track. Does that sound like an action track? Is this something to get you pumped up for this series? Because this feels like a leisurely stroll through downtown music, not ass-kicking music. This is the type of track I'd use in my videos while I drone on about themes or some shit to trick people into thinking I was actually interesting or smart. But after this scene, again, cut to some other characters who, and I swear I'm not against a show introducing characters in their first episode, I'm not a complete idiot. But this is getting ridiculous. It cuts to some other new characters now talking about a video of an older version of the kid from the first few seconds and that fight scene playing music in a half-assed Tuxedo Mask cosplay. It seriously takes 6 minutes into this series for the show to settle on a main character proper. This whole episode comes off as an unfocused mess. Follow me on a bit of a thought experiment here where I just recut one of the scenes for this show and trim some of the excess. So just imagine that instead of the nonsensical opening we got, this series starts with the kid getting off at the train station. It follows him bumping into the girl, which demonstrates his powers. After he comes back to the real world and gets away from her, flash back to the older guy from the opening saying he shouldn't let others touch his hand. Have the rest of the episode play out as it already does, so him bumping into the other guy, this girl, the restaurant scene, maybe expand on the earlier failed broadcast here, and then flow right into the ending. So in this hypothetical recut, what information is lost? because the episode explains everything it does in the first few minutes better later on, and the character introductions can be extended when it shows them all reacting to his live performance towards the end. Or since most of the characters introduced don't have much to offer at that moment besides a quick appearance, leave the scenes alone since establishing they are a thing in this series was all it amounted to. If nothing's lost, it shouldn't be included. This tells me that the first 6 minutes of the series were a complete waste of time because anything they set up is explained better later, more logically, and with a more cohesive flow to the episode as a whole. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, is worse than just wasting my time. Because someone spent money making those first 6 minutes. They spent money getting those shitty CG models made, they spent money animating a 2D character to interact with them, and they spent money animating this dynamic fight scene fluff. That's all money that could have been better allocated to making this series look better, period, since the animation is a mess and the character designs are essentially yaoi hands incarnate. And understand that these are the macro issues with the series. It's not getting a pass on the moment-to-moment editing since that's equally as confusing. This restaurant scene in particular is egregious beyond belief. Immediately it starts with 2 shots tracking in on plates of food. Now this does establish the scene that they're eating, but when doing any sort of camera movement, it needs to feel continuous. Either cutting to a static image or a physical equivalent. In this case, the plates roughly equal size in the frame, or a shot that continues or even reverses the movement. This all feels less stressful to the brain since it's connecting the shots in a way. By having this shot zooming in on a plate of food and abruptly cutting to another zoom that's essentially the exact same feels jarring. It either pulls you out of the moment or it's just off-putting. And it's not like they don't know what they're doing, there's plenty of shots that lead the viewer into the next. Chunks of this scene flow well enough, but there's always a caveat with this series. Like breaking the 180-degree rule and shooting a shot from outside the window reverses the spatial awareness of the 2 characters in the scene, which comes off as confusing. The series had followed that rule until that point, and it's not as though this is a particularly metaphorical shot, as him listlessly looking out the window could have easily been conveyed inside the restaurant without swapping their orientation. And it only does this for this particular cut. So there was absolutely no reason to do it. Understand that the character's position on screen switching for that single shot doesn't mean anything in the larger sense. It's not as though their positions of power changed in that moment or something changed within them to call for a perspective switch. It's just an odd choice. Small decisions like that plague this series. Cutting from an over-the-shoulder to a POV shot of the opposite character, awkward framing, and the list goes on. Like, why do so many shots have random people walking in front of them? Just why? It's not like this is a live-action production where you have extras there. The entire production screams of a crap storyboard and a director who didn't know what they wanted with this series, or just didn't care. Either way, I'm feeling the same after having watched this episode as many times as I have, apathetic to the series as a whole. But who knows, if people want me to torture myself and make a follow-up video, let me know in the comments. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Please like, comment, subscribe, and do all the other YouTube stuff because that really helps me out. Thanks for watching.